My name is Varsha Ravichandran, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner& Townsend. I'm going to be your host for today. This is a retrofit information support and expertise event fully funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Over to Gareth, who's going to be our presenter today. Gareth Field is a senior consultant with Turner& Townsend, so let me welcome him. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome. So thank you, Varsha, for the introduction. As you said, I'm senior consultant with Turner & Townsend, but actually probably more relevant to you guys is I was working in social housing before this, and I was delivering the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and the retrofit programs with that. And before that, I was running the Energy Advice Service for Cumbria Action for Sustainability. So very much around engaging with the audience that we're working with and actually sort of supporting them on working out ways to really properly engage with and get into challenging audiences. And this is where we need to really start to think about is lots and lots of stuff has been going on in the past with retrofit. And as we go forward, we're going to get more and more challenging residents. We're going to get more and more challenging properties to deal with. So we need to get really good at this. And part of me for this is around how we develop this communication engagement plan and actually how we then run it through. I'm going to start off with thinking about that communications and engagement plan. And I will very much talk about this as the two things go hand in hand. You cannot do a communications plan and an engagement plan. They just have to sit together, and it's really, really important that we kind of get that from the get-go and kind of go, right, let's just start thinking about this, about how we're going to work with people, how we're going to engage with them, how we're going to get them involved, how we're actually going to kind of meet in the middle, and actually how we're going to talk to people, how we're going to get that message across to them. And those two things are really, really important to kind of get working together. We're going to look at the stakeholders. We're going to look at the different types of people that we can work with to support this, different organizations, different people in the communities, etc., that we can work with. And who are those surprising stakeholders? Who are those ones that we might not think about until you're actually there on the ground and you meet them? We're then going to go through very much about developing plans. We're going to be quite, looking at some suggestions, ideas, some templates that you can use and kind of use to have as your communications engagement plan. Some ideas, what we can do, and finish up with some top tips. When I first created this slide, I had a chicken and an egg, and and I was thinking about this, and I was like, what comes first? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? And I think that the two came along together, and not trying not to get into kind of too much kind of an evolution discussion, but and the same is true with communication engagement. We are needing to communicate with people. We cannot do engagement without communicating with them. We cannot have that kind of positive, informed discussions without that sort of ability to have a way of sharing that message. We cannot then, if we don't do that first, then they won't come, and there won't be that engagement and those ability to kind of influence and affect what we're doing on the ground. So really, really key that they embedded together. As I mentioned, that I've just been at Housing 25 for a couple of days, and I was chatting to someone, and it's like more and more I get further and further into this world, I realise however much I might not be comfortable with it. Communication, marketing is really, really at the heart of everything that we should be doing. And when we're thinking about all this, so the other kind of point I'm going to put out into this is when you start to think about your retrofit programs, your work that you're going to be doing, so whether that's local authority, whether that's a housing association, etc., is your communication and engagement plan starts at the beginning. Biggest fails that I've seen, the biggest issues I've seen with this is when a project manager gets onto a mission, they do all this stuff that they want to do, they think they're going to do, and then they turn around to the marketing team and go, and market that, please. And the marketing team go, that's great. It's not possible. We're not going to be able to do that because, and they'll be able to give you a load of reasons. I was really lucky. I got to work for the National Trust for a really long time here in Cumbria. And my kind of starting point with a lot of my projects was, all right, brilliant, we want to do this. We want to get really excited, etc. And then you get to communications team, and then they kind of give you that sense of reality. What is achievable? What can be done? How can you do it? And just starting to change that narrative about it's being driven by us, and comms comes along to actually it's teamwork. The retrofit program, your aims, your objectives, what you're trying to do, where you're trying to do it, etc., links in with your marketing and engagement plan, and from the get-go. So, hopefully some takeaways from today is comms and engagement needs to be from day one, and you need to be involved in your planning your whole retrofit program. So just to be really clear on it, so the purpose of engagement is, sometimes it's about involvement. It's about influencing. You're aiming to reduce the risks of refusals. Refusals are really expensive in retrofit. You're maintaining the interest in achieving buy-in, and you're communicating with those residents. So that's where we go back to. It's two things go hand in hand. Communication is about informing all the stakeholders. So we'll talk about stakeholders in a bit, but all those different types of stakeholders, whether you need to involve them or just inform them, still needs communication. How are we going to do that? Is it through newsletters? Is it through web articles? Is it through blogs, etc.? It helps you develop the understanding of the process. So as you think about your delivery, thinking about how you're going to communicate it will also influence your timelines. It also influences your order that you might do things in. So actually, as you're starting to talk to your communication team and your engagement team, you might have decided that you're going to work in this part of your town, this part of your community in a certain time of the year. You might be going there and going, well, actually, that's a really, really important religious festival. There's really high density of people in that community that'll be involved in that religious festival. So actually, let's just change the timeline. Let's move the timeline to later in the year, where we're going to get more buy-in because we're not affecting that religious festival. So again, back into that, risks of refusals. Part of that reason for communication is to get effective engagement. So the two things to say, hopefully you're starting to get this idea, cyclical programming, they go hand in hand. We've got to get the two things working together. Really, really important. So moving on to stakeholders. So we're going to have to come up with a plan. Let's start thinking about it. Understanding your stakeholders. So start with a really, really big bit of paper and start just writing down anybody that might be relevant, and they might be relevant, and let's be realistic about this. I've seen stakeholder mapping stuff where you start to go, well, Greenpeace could be important, and etc., etc. And it's like, let's be realistic, but who are the types of people, who are the types of organizations and bodies that are relevant to your retrofit program? So we're thinking about a retrofit program in a community. It's like, okay, residents are really important. What's the residents' interest in this topic? So, it's going to affect their homes, it's going to affect their families, it's going to affect their communities, it's going to affect their friends, it's going to affect their bills, etc. So that's actually really, really important. But who else in that community is important? So, we just mentioned it, families. If you're working in a community with lots of aging population, then actually, how do you engage with the families of those residents? Can you kind of engage with those families? Because actually they're really useful to help you get in for retrofit, because actually they might understand it more. They might be more open to these discussions. Thinking about who else is in that community. Are there community groups? So are we talking about faith groups I mentioned a second ago? Are there other types of groups? So volunteer groups, the church, all sorts of different types of stuff, that University of Third Age, those kind of things that you kind of go, well, who can we talk to? Who can we kind of work with? What else is happening in that community? So, I was chatting to somebody yesterday at housing, and we were talking about this, and we were doing this program up in the north of Cumbria, and all these homes we weren't getting any traction in getting residents out of their homes to come and talk to us. We'd put on this kind of event in a local cafe, etc., etc. And it wasn't until we saw that there was a guy going around selling meat out of the back of his van, like they do in rural communities. So we went and talked to him, kind of communicated what we were doing, asked him if he could share the message. As he went around the village, he was telling people. And then we saw a definite increase in the afternoon of people coming. And then was like, well, what have you heard? And they've said, oh, well, the guy, he told us about what was going on, so we thought we'd come and have a look. So actually, as a stakeholder we never even thought about, actually suddenly became a really valuable stakeholder that day to get residents to come and engage with us. He's a trusted voice in that community. So it's kind of a phrase that I have in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about stakeholders. Who are those trusted voices? So another example is from the Energy Advice Service, we were kind of realizing that we were only working with a certain type of person. And we were like, well, actually, how do we get into working with the deaf community? How do we get into working with the visually impaired community, etc.? And suddenly we're like realizing, well, actually, we work with Cumbria Deaf Association. We develop some signed videos. We create some opportunities for people with hearing impairments to engage with us, and to work with us. And suddenly it was like, actually, that stakeholder of Cumbria Deaf Association just gave us a doorway in to a huge number of our community that needed support and needed help. So who are those organisations? So Citizen Advice is a great organisation to work with. Have a look into your communities and go, right, who are reaching out into those communities? Who are the third sector groups that are working really positively? The reason we were working with this housing association in the North Lakes was because we were an energy advice service. They wanted us to come in and be that trusted voice again. So it all works, very well. Being really clear with stakeholders. Stakeholders can help projects, but they can also hinder projects. So being able to kind of do that assessment, what are they going to do? How can they help you? But also, what can they do to hinder you? What can they do to really, really scupper your project, your delivery? And, probably any of us who've worked with stakeholders can think of those kind of people that you're just kind of going, oh, they're just a drain on this project, but we need to keep them on board. We need to keep working really hard with them. And being really clear with these stakeholders what their communication preference is. So is it about being online and getting stuff? Is it about face-to-face stuff? What is it that's going to be important to them? So when we're thinking about these stakeholders and then we start to kind of go, right, how are we going to work with them? What are we going to work with them? I think it's been really clear on what the negotiables are. It would be lovely. And, if any of you guys have done any youth work or anything like that, you can in youth work go with a really kind of open blue sky, right? What are we going to do, kids? What are we going to do with this? And you can be really creative and come to kind of agreed outcomes through negotiation, discussion, etc. Not everything in retrofit is negotiable. Not everything is possible to go through that process. So being really clear on what are you negotiating with them? What are you discussing with them? And what is not going down the world of, well, this is just going to be done to you, so tough. But actually then what are the stuff you need to get them on board with and get them kind of engaged with? So if you're thinking about residents, you might be kind of going, well, actually, we want to do a new heating system. So you need to get them on board around a new heating system, get them excited about the idea of an air source heat pump, get them understand the benefits of the air source heat pump, how it might make their lives better, etc. What you then might be negotiating on with them is, where does the fan go in the garden? Where do you put the air source heat pump in the house? Where, etc., etc. If you're going to put solar panels on, how are you going to do the solar panels, etc., etc. So it's not that you're inspiring them and encouraging them and getting them excited about an air source heat pump. You're then also negotiating where it's going to be and how it's going to fit into their life. So the two things kind of rub along together, but it's never like, right, you're having an air source heat pump. Your discussion is, what color do you want it? We've got to kind of work with this, and for anybody who's it's a sort of similar age to me, you might remember a band called the Terrorvision, and they had an album called How to Make Friends and Influence People. And I always just have that in the back of my head when I'm thinking about resident engagement and stakeholder engagement. It's how to make friends. Let's just be nice about this. Just try and make friends, and let's try and do stuff that is the best for everyone. So, you can see some stuff in there. If you're working on warm homes, achieving EPC, it's not negotiable. Positioning of where the air source heat pump fan could be. So colours are the new item. So are you putting new doors on? Yeah, maybe, the opportunity is to choose the colour of the door. Where are you positioning it? What are you doing? I've seen some horrendous installs where the installer, we had a void property and the installer came in and just put the unit for the solar PV system basically in the lounge where you'd probably want to hang a picture of your family. It was horrendous. It was like, no, that has to move. You can't just kind of dunk it on a wall at head height in a room. So thinking about all that stuff, what is in negotiables? What can you talk about? What can't you? Timeline's a really interesting one. As I mentioned earlier, you might just be kind of going, oh, we really want to work in this area at this time of the year. Well, actually, big religious festival. Don't even try and work at that time of the year, but actually going in and talking to them and going, well, what time of the year is good for you? When can we do this as a stakeholder group? So lots and lots to think about as you're doodling out your stakeholders, as you can kind of go and get a big of a sort of wish list, start thinking about what the things that they can help you with, what things they can help you with around timelines or access to buildings or communication, as like with hearing association. Then get down, once you've done that, start getting into a stakeholder mapping. And we're very much talking about external people to start with. Who are those people? So residents, resident groups, etc. You see on there, I put MPs and councillors. There, probably my biggest cock up on my last retrofit program was not talking to the MP to start with, and not keeping them informed. Actually, there's two things there, because he kept nagging, kept sending emails to a chief exec going, well, my constituent is, and it's like, well, it's the same, because same message that I gave you a couple of months ago, but I should have just kept keeping informed about what was going on. Same with local councillors, etc. They're really, really passionate about their communities. So keep them informed, keep them aware of what's going on. The other thing in this is that your stakeholders internally, who are they? So thinking about, as your local authority, who are your stakeholders? Who are the people you need to make sure they know what is going on, when it's going on, how is it going to be happening? So if a resident in a community phones up and goes, I've been told I can get free solar panels, is this a scam? And the person on customer services goes, well, I know nothing about it. Yeah, probably is a scam. And suddenly you've got a block. You just boom, that resident's no longer going to work with you, no longer going to work and engage with you. So making sure that internal teams know what's going to happen. So if they get a phone call, if they get asked on the street, if they get etc., they can go, oh yeah, we know about that. Seems really good, etc. And they can be that positive instead of that hindrance for you. So moving that on is kind of that assessment of what that stakeholder can do for you, their ability to influence the project. Can this person group change the direction of the project? And then how much interest does this person group have in the project? You have to do an assessment of that. And sometimes there is an issue when your assessment of it is different to their opinion. Sometimes you get that clash. And I've definitely had somebody in the community that I was working with who believed he was very powerful and believed he had a huge amount of sway and influence over what was happening. And he was very vocal and very challenging and very difficult to work with. But actually, he had no ability to influence what we were doing, and he still had a very strong interest, but had no ability to influence what was happening. Because it was, this was a resident of Cumbria versus a national project. So it took a lot of challenge to then manage that stakeholder, to kind of make him feel heard, make him feel valued, but actually not impact on what we were doing. So that kind of, there are some real challenges in this. It's not easy. And this is where I'm kind of going, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes capacity. And if anybody's listening to this going, that's great, but we don't have the capacity, I feel really sorry for you. And hopefully you can argue the case to get more capacity. So really simple stakeholder assessment: who the stakeholder is, their ability to influence on a 1 to 3 scale, their level of interest on a 1 to 3 scale, and you just times that together and you come up with a score. And that score impacts on what you then do. So are you going to inform them? Are you going to consult with them? Or are you going to engage with them? Engage, involve. I prefer the term generally involve, because that's what we're doing. It's an involvement. So, it could be that you start inviting some residents onto your board, your project board for delivery of your retrofit programs. So actually they've got a voice in that overall delivery of the program. You might then, involve resident groups in those kind of discussions, etc. You've got to do what's right for you, and for you as as the retrofit organization, but also potentially what's right if you're thinking about you and your contractor and those relationships. How can your stakeholders inform your contractors? How can they support delivery from a contractor perspective, as well as you as the person organizing that retrofit program? Once you've done your assessment, that's not it over and done with, is you've got to keep tracking it and keep that relationship managed. So, for example, here, that CEO, they're engaged. They get sort of emails, regular emails, monthly one-to-ones. It might be, when was the last time you contacted? And any key actions from that last contact. What did you say you'd do? So you can track that and make sure that you're keeping it up to date with this. Like my issue with this with the MP, actually, this should have been kept up to date more, and should have been like, yeah, monthly email explaining where we were working next and what kind of stuff we'd be doing. So just think about that. And this feels like a huge amount of work, but honestly, the more effort you put in here, the better relationship you're going to have with your stakeholders, etc., as you go along. Thinking about now developing your plan. So you've worked out who your stakeholders are. You've got your informs, you've got your consults and your engagers. So if you're thinking about your engagers, what is it you need the question? What is the question you need the answer to? How will you get the stakeholders to participate? Will you actually do it through a questionnaire? Will you do it through a face-to-face meeting? Will you do it from knocking on doors, etc.? Who's the best person to facilitate this? Because it might not be you. Thinking about if you're a social housing provider, have you got neighbourhood partners? Have you got people who work in those communities week in, week out? Or actually, have you got stakeholders who can do this for you? So as Cumbria Deaf Association, they were the best people to facilitate that relationship with that part of the community. Are we open to the answers that happen through that process? So if we go out and do all this and we hear messages that we don't like, what are we going to do with it? How are you going to tackle those? Active involvement in finding the answers. So it's not just go out, what do you think? Give people opportunities to reflect, give people opportunities to think about it and come back to you. So you can see all that, lots going on, lots to think about, lots to kind of, okay, this is going to take time, this is going to take energy, this is going to take capacity, as I've said. So, and then thinking about this in different formats. So, as you can see, I'm not a young man, so I have no concept of what all this TikTok, Instagram type stuff is. But I know very clearly that if I want to communicate to my 15-year-old on the sofa, I'm probably better off sending him a WhatsApp message or a chat message than trying to talk to him. So, how do we communicate with that audience? How to communicate, not necessarily 15-year-olds, but how to communicate with 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are our residents that might be living in bedsits and flats, etc. How do we get to that message across them? How do we get them to understand? I've seen some brilliant examples of using VR headsets and to visualize what it might look like in the future and how does this fit with that retrofit. Would love to see more of it. I think it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of really help people visualize what's going to change to their homes through print. We all like it still, press releases, leaflets, etc., 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 going through the print. But I think really important is about face to face. And the thing that I want to get to now is when we're thinking about our engagement and we're thinking especially around residents, we're looking to get informed consent, because basically we're looking to go into their homes and do something in their homes, whether they own that house or not. That's not the thing here. This is their home. So the example I use a lot is, as a parent, I get a letter from school and they go, we want to take your child rafting. I'm like, okay, that's really exciting. That's really exciting. Because in my head, when I think about rafting, I'm thinking about big inflatable rubber things going down whitewater, down steep waterfalls, rapids, etc., etc. And, there's the risk of falling off and getting bashed by rocks and, that kind of thing. And I kind of go, okay, that's what, in my head, rafting is. However, what the school actually mean is they're going to a pond in the outskirts of Cumbria. They're going to give the kids some barrels and some logs and some string. And they have to make a raft that's enough to float out to get to a buoy in the middle of this pond. So what I think's happening versus what's actually happening are so far apart that, as a parent, I'm going, am I going to give consent for this? No, it's too dangerous. I don't want that to happen. My beautiful daughter, I don't want her falling off, bashing into rocks, etc. Because I've not had enough information. Now, if you translate that to retrofitting, brilliant, we want to retrofit your home. We want to do all these energy efficient measures. We want to do all this work to your house. Can you let us in? I don't know what all that means. I don't know what you're talking about. No, because I don't know. So how do we get informed consent? How do we get them to say, yes, you can come in because I'm excited about what's going on? So, there's lots of urban myths out there about air source heat pumps, etc. They're more expensive to run and they're inefficient and they don't work when it's cold, etc., etc. So how do we get the information to our residents about air source heat pumps to get them excited about it? To get them kind of going, actually, yeah, I do want you to come in and I do want you to fit this air source heat pump because I'm excited about it. How do we get that informed consent? So making sure we're giving the right information, make sure we're giving the information they want to know. So, lots of debate over the last couple of days at housing about brilliant, well, we're going to save carbon, we're going to do all this, etc., etc. Probably not that much of interest to them. This is going to save you 20% of your electricity bills. This is going to make you, it's going to reduce your energy consumption by this amount, etc., etc. What are the things that are relevant and important when you're trying to get people to make informed consent so they know what it's going to be? That's where we go back to those VR headsets or designs or prints. They give you that physical idea of what it's going to do. What change will it make to my house? How will my home look different? How will my home feel different, etc. So we've kind of going through all that process, and right, we're going to make a plan. We're going to write this down now, because if it's written down, we know much better that we're going to stick to it. So the what, what's the audience, how are we going to do it, when are we going to do it, what resources are going to be required, who can help, and what the success criteria. Because we can do all this, but we need to make sure we're successful with this. So we're thinking this through. How do we break the message down? I could say to anybody probably on this call that we're going to come and do a retrofit assessment at your home. Most of you probably have a vague idea of what we're on about, etc. But actually, when we take that down to a resident, we're going to do a retrofit assessment at your home. What the heck does that mean? How long is it going to take? What are you going to do? Etc. 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 Especially when you start talking about things like we're going to do a borescope in your cavity. You're going to drill. What does that mean? Well, we're going to drill a hole through you all. No, you're not. Etc. How can we break this message down to make it really easy to understand? I think about, as I think about this, is kind of going, okay, well, if we can write it down in English in a simple enough way, it can probably get translated. And if you're dealing with residents who English isn't the first language, you might need to translate this. So it needs to be really simple. It needs to be really clear. There's that campaign for plain English, isn't there? Think about that. How can we make sure that we're communicating the most clearly, plain, effective language that people will understand? And there's no jargon. There's no three-letter acronyms. There's nothing in there that just actually will just confuse people. So talking now about, you start talking about EPCs. Well, do they really know what an EPC is? Can we explain that a little bit more? So this is kind of taking those two things and putting it into a table and just putting it into our plan. So energy efficiency assessments to start at Acacia Avenue. Who's going to be involved with the asset manager? They're going to be, who's the audience of residents of Acacia Avenue? How are we going to do this? Through a letter. We're going to do it 3 weeks before. We're going to need a letter, and on that letter is also going to need to be a diagram of the process, a logo of the contractor, an image of the assessor, etc. Who can help with that? Well, the comms manager can. How are we going to know if it's successful? Access rates, number of refusals. So we've got one strand of how we're going to communicate about these retrofit assessments. We're going to do another strand where we're going to use the community engagement partner, and they're going to work with the residents group, and they're going to attend the group meeting, and they're going to do that the quarterly before the start. They're going to need a slide deck of images and language and etc. So lots and lots of information in there on a slide deck. Who's going to help with this? The neighbourhood team. Again, similar kind of measurements of success. What else are we going to do? Well, the resident liaison partner is going to go out and do a neighbourhood walkabout 1 week before this programme starts. So they can go out and knock on doors, ask questions, talk to residents, get information across. They might need a flyer, so they might need a resource, and they might need a flyer, but they might not. When are they going to do it? Well, actually, they're going to do it in the evening, so like the sort of 5 to 7 o'clock evening time, where maybe more residents are at home than 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. So thinking this through. So one action you might think is one kind of fairly clear, easy action. Actually, you can break it down and make sure that it's being done in an effective way by a variety of people at different timescales to try and get that message across. So just sort of going to wrap up with a couple of kind of lines on this now. So some top tips. Make sure your language is really clear. Make sure you do all your internal messaging. So I've not talked a lot about those internal stakeholders today, but from a housing provider's perspective, you've got to get everyone in your organization able to talk about your retrofit program. So whether they are customer services team or the chief exec, they need to have an understanding. So when they get asked, they can support you and kind of give you your program kind of really good support. So having some boilerplate messages, so some standard responses for staff to use on their consistent response. So, it could just be that everyone has a flyer and they can have that in their van, and when they get asked, they can hand it out or they can talk about it, etc., etc. Flowcharts and diagrams are brilliant. So the last retrofit program we got a flowchart created on the back of the letter. So one side of the letter, you turned it over and there was this flowchart that just kind of took you through the process. Really, really easy. The earlier you do this, the better, as in getting people warmed up to the idea. Don't tell people that something's going to happen to their house 12 months before it happens there, no, because they will either have forgotten about it or they'll be miling you every couple of months. When's it happening? When's it happening? So engage the concept, engage that we're doing retrofit works, engage that we'll be coming around and when working through a program, etc., but give people kind of facts and figures when you can give it to them, not just sort of, your house will be getting done. Well, will it? Won't it? When will it be done? Etc. Going back to the involving comms and community engagement from the start. When I started at the Housing Association, when we were starting the SHDF program, I was like, brilliant, how are we going to communicate to residents? And they went, well, we have a letter. Okay, what else are we going to do? No, we have a letter, that's all we do. Okay, and how's your current access rates? Or we get about 50% access rates. Okay, brilliant. Let's do something different. Let's do a different approach to this. And our access rates went from about 50% down to about 15% of refusals. 15% were refusing access because we tackled this in a different way. Instead of just sending out a very formal letter, we sent out a nice letter. We sent out a flow diagram. We phoned them up. We had communication with them. Neighbourhood partners talked to them, etc., etc. All this different stuff, and the resident liaison partner was amazing. So lots and lots of change in how we did it got us a different answer. And if you don't have capacity in your team, look to outsource your comms work to an agency. There are some brilliant agencies out there that do all sorts of fantastic comms work. So reach out to them. If you're doing a funded program, you can claim it under your A&A costs. Yes, it does cost, but actually the value of getting a decent comms agency in to do the comms side of it will save you money in failed access and failed works. So really, really valuable. I'd highly recommend getting a comms agency. And this is not me saying that, I have a second industry as a comms agency. I don't. I've just found them exceptionally useful and exceptionally valuable. Brilliant. So yeah, that's it for me up front. So thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. I think that was a very interesting and extensive masterclass presentation, and I hope all of you found it as useful as me.